I watched them battle from a distance no human was ever meant to survive, and in that moment I understood something that would haunt me long after the war ended. It was not the size of the enemy or the power they wielded that terrified the galaxy. It was us. My name is Arlen Voss, Senior Observer of the Coalition Archives, and I had been assigned to document the extinction of Earth. That was the official purpose, at least. The truth was far less dignified. The Coalition had already decided humanity would fall. They always did this when a young species reached too far too fast. They called it containment, but everyone knew what it really was. Erasure with paperwork. The enemy we faced was not a civilization. It was not something that could be negotiated with or reasoned with. The entity was classified as a predatory swarm consciousness older than most recorded stars. It devoured biospheres and harvested neural energy, leaving behind empty worlds stripped of life and memory. The Coalition had tried to stop it before. They had failed every time. When the swarm changed course toward Earth, the Council did not vote on intervention. They voted on observation. And that is how I came to orbit a blue world filled with a species the galaxy barely respected, waiting to watch them die. At first nothing seemed unusual. Human transmissions filled the void with noise. Music, news, arguments, laughter. Their networks were chaotic and inefficient by Coalition standards. The governments were fragmented, their militaries divided, their technology inconsistent. They were unprepared. Or so we thought. The first contact report came from a deep space listening post near the outer edge of the solar system. A human vessel had encountered the swarm ahead of schedule. The recording was short. Static dominated most of it, but I could still hear the fear in the voice. Unknown mass approaching, no visible structure responding with light-based signals, no response, weapons ineffective, it is changing shape, I repeat, it is adapting. The transmission ended with a sound I had never heard before. It was not an explosion. It was not a scream. It was something deeper, like reality itself had been torn open. The Coalition observers began compiling predictions. Earth would fall within 12 cycles. Casualties total. No survivors expected. I remember feeling detached as I recorded the estimates. I had seen worlds fall before. It was tragic but inevitable. That is how the universe worked. Then the humans did something unexpected. They did not retreat. Within hours of the first contact, every major nation on Earth shifted into a unified defensive posture. Their networks synchronized. Their conflicts paused. Their resources were redirected toward a single purpose: survival. I watched fleets assemble in orbit faster than any species I had studied. Ships that had been designed for entirely different purposes were retrofitted for combat. Civilian vessels were armed. Experimental technologies were deployed without hesitation. They were improvising. The Coalition observers found this amusing. Improvisation was a sign of desperation, not strategy. The swarm entered the system 3 days later. It did not arrive as ships or formations. It appeared as a distortion in space itself, a moving shadow that consumed light and bent gravity. Sensors struggled to define its boundaries because it had none. It was not one thing. It was many. And it was hungry. The first battle took place near the orbit of Jupiter. Human forces engaged with everything they had. Missiles, lasers, kinetic strikes, nuclear payloads. Nothing worked. The swarm absorbed the attacks and adapted. Its surface shifted, forming structures that reflected energy and dispersed impact. Each strike made it stronger, more efficient, more lethal. Within minutes the human fleet was gone. The Coalition observers recorded the loss with clinical precision. Expected outcome. But something else was recorded as well. The humans had not stopped transmitting. Even as their ships were destroyed, they continued to broadcast data. Weapon performance, enemy response, structural changes. Every second of the battle was analyzed and shared across their network. They were learning. The second engagement occurred near Mars. This time the human fleet was different. Their weapons had changed. Frequencies adjusted, trajectories optimized, patterns randomized. They attacked in coordinated waves, each strike designed to test a specific variable. The swarm adapted again, but it took longer. The battle lasted 9 minutes. The humans lost again, but not as quickly. The coalition observers stopped laughing. By the time the swarm reached the asteroid belt, the humans had transformed their entire military doctrine. They were no longer fighting to win individual battles. They were fighting to understand. Every loss was data. Every failure was a step forward. I began to feel something I had not expected. Unease. The third battle took place near Earth orbit. This was where I saw it. This was where everything changed. The human fleet assembled in numbers that defied logic. Every available vessel was there. Warships, cargo transports, mining rigs, even orbital stations had been repurposed into weapons platforms. At the center of the formation was something new. A structure unlike anything the coalition had seen. It was not elegant. It was not refined. It was a mass of interconnected modules built with urgency rather than precision. Energy readings spiked far beyond safe limits. Systems operated at thresholds that should have caused immediate failure. It was unstable. It was dangerous. It was human. The swarm advanced toward Earth, its form shifting as it prepared to consume the planet. The humans did not wait. They attacked. The opening strike was unlike anything before. Instead of targeting the swarm directly, the humans targeted space itself. Gravitational distortions were generated in rapid succession, creating pockets of instability that disrupted the swarm's cohesion. For the first time, the swarm reacted. It slowed. The human fleet surged forward, deploying weapons that emitted patterns of energy designed not to destroy but to confuse. Signals that mimicked neural activity. Frequencies that interfered with the swarm's collective processing. They were not just fighting it. They were hacking it. The swarm adapted, but the humans adapted faster. Each time the swarm shifted its defenses, the humans altered their approach. New weapons were deployed. Old ones were modified. Strategies evolved in real time. I watched as ships were lost by the hundreds. And I watched as the remaining ships grew more effective with every passing second. Then the central structure activated. Energy levels spiked beyond measurable limits. The surrounding space began to distort, bending under the strain of whatever the humans had created. The coalition observers demanded clarification. There was none. Human transmissions identified the device with a simple designation. Last resort. I felt a chill as I recorded the name. The swarm recognized the threat. It changed course, abandoning its slow advance and rushing toward the structure with terrifying speed. The humans held the line. They knew they could not stop it. They only needed to delay it. Ships collided with the swarm in deliberate sacrifices. Weapons were fired at point-blank range. Pilots chose impact over retreat. They were buying time. The structure reached critical output. And then it happened. The device did not fire a beam or release an explosion. It unfolded. Space tore open around it, revealing something that should not exist. A region of absolute nothingness where even light ceased to exist. The distortion expanded rapidly, engulfing a portion of the swarm. The swarm reacted with something that could only be described as fear. It tried to pull back. It failed. The distortion consumed it, erasing it from existence, not destroying it but removing it entirely, as if it had never been there. The human transmissions confirmed what I could barely comprehend. They had created a localized null field. A weapon that erased reality. The cost was immediate. The structure collapsed under its own output. The ships closest to it were destroyed. The distortion began to destabilize, threatening to consume everything around it. The humans did not hesitate. They shut it down, even though it meant losing their advantage. Even though it meant the swarm would survive. The remaining swarm retreated, not strategically, not cautiously. It fled. For the first time in recorded history, the predatory swarm had encountered something it could not adapt to, something it could not understand, something it feared. Humanity. Silence filled the observation channels. The coalition observers did not speak. They did not need to. We all understood what we had witnessed. The swarm had not been defeated, but it had been driven away by a species that had been expected to fall within days. The aftermath was chaotic. Earth was damaged. Entire regions had been lost. Millions had died, but the planet still lived. Human transmissions shifted from combat to recovery. Aid was coordinated. Resources were distributed. Efforts were made to rebuild. They mourned their losses. But they did not stop. The Coalition Council convened an emergency session. Intervention was no longer a question. It was a necessity, but not for the reason anyone had expected. The debate was intense. Some argued that humanity had proven its worth and should be welcomed into the coalition. Others warned that a species capable of creating such a weapon was too dangerous to trust. I remained silent. I had seen the battle. I knew the truth. Humanity was not dangerous because of their weapons. They were dangerous because of their nature. They learned too quickly. They adapted too fast. They refused to accept defeat even when it was inevitable. They turned failure into progress. They turned desperation into innovation. They turned fear into fuel. And they did it without hesitation. The final decision was made. The coalition would approach Earth not as observers but as allies. Cautious allies. Careful allies. But allies nonetheless. I was chosen to deliver the message. As my vessel descended toward the planet, I felt something I had not experienced in all my years of observation. Uncertainty. I did not know how they would receive us. I did not know if they would trust us. I did not know if we deserved their trust. The landing site was a makeshift command center built from the remnants of destroyed structures. Human personnel moved with purpose, their actions efficient despite the exhaustion etched into their features. I was escorted to a central chamber where a group of leaders awaited. They did not look like conquerors. They looked like survivors. I delivered the coalition's message offering support, cooperation and recognition. There was a long silence after I finished. Then one of them spoke. "We appreciate the offer." His voice was calm, but there was something beneath it, something I could not quite identify. "But understand this. We did not fight to impress you. We did not fight to join your coalition. We fought because it was our home." He paused, then continued. "If you want to stand with us, you are welcome. But do not expect us to become something we are not." I nodded. It was the only response I could give. As I left the chamber, I looked back at the humans moving through the damaged world, rebuilding, preparing, adapting. I realized then that the swarm had not just encountered a new species. It had encountered a new kind of force. One that did not rely on perfection or predictability. One that thrived on chaos and change. One that refused to be consumed. I returned to my vessel and began my final report. I watched them battle. I watched them lose. I watched them learn. I watched them do the impossible. And in the end I discovered why even alien monsters fear humanity. It is not because of what they are. It is because of what they become when everything is taken from them. They do not break. They do not surrender. They evolve. And that is something no monster can ever truly defeat. The first thing I learned after delivering the coalition's message was that humanity had no intention of slowing down. 3 days after the battle, the ruins of their orbital defense grid were already being dismantled, not for repair but for redesign. Nothing was sacred. Nothing was preserved simply because it had existed before. Every broken system, every destroyed ship, every fragment of data was stripped down, analyzed and repurposed. They were preparing for something. At first I assumed it was caution. The swarm had retreated, but it had not been destroyed. History showed that it always returned eventually. Perhaps humanity understood that. I was wrong. They were not preparing for its return. They were preparing to chase it. The realization came during a closed strategic briefing I was permitted to observe under strict coalition authority. Human leadership gathered in a chamber beneath what had once been a city, now reduced to skeletal towers and fractured ground. The atmosphere was tense but not fearful. It was focused. A projection filled the center of the room, displaying a map of local space. The path of the swarm's retreat glowed faintly against the dark. One of the commanders spoke. "We have a window." Another responded immediately. "Not a big one, but enough." They began discussing trajectories, resource allocation and deployment timelines. The scale of their planning was staggering. Entire fleets were being rebuilt not for defense but for pursuit. Experimental drives were being rushed into production. Weapons that had barely survived their first use were being redesigned for sustained operation. I finally interrupted. You intend to follow it? The room went quiet for a moment as several of them looked toward me. Yes. The answer was simple, direct, certain. I struggled to process it. The swarm has never been hunted, I said. It adapts to every known form of attack. It consumes entire civilizations. Even the coalition has only ever managed to survive by avoiding it. The same commander who had answered before stepped closer to the projection. That is exactly why we have to go. He gestured toward the path of the swarm. If we wait, it comes back stronger. It learns from us the same way we learned from it. Next time it will not hesitate. Next time it will not retreat. He turned toward me. We don't get a second chance. There was no arrogance in his voice. Only logic. Only resolve. I realized then that humanity's greatest strength was not their weapons or their adaptability. It was their refusal to accept a passive role in their own survival. The coalition sent urgent advisories warning against such action. Pursuit was deemed reckless. Engagement beyond controlled defensive zones was prohibited by every known strategic doctrine. Humanity ignored them. Within a week the first wave of pursuit vessels left Earth orbit. I requested permission to accompany them. The Council hesitated. Then they agreed. I think they wanted someone to witness what would happen next. My assignment placed me aboard a human vessel designated Resolute Dawn. It was not the largest ship in the fleet, but it was one of the most advanced. Its systems incorporated lessons learned from every moment of the previous battles. Nothing about it felt stable in the way coalition ships did. It felt alive, constantly adjusting, recalibrating, optimizing. The crew welcomed me with a mixture of curiosity and indifference. They did not treat me as an outsider, but neither did they waste time accommodating me. Every individual on that ship had a purpose and they executed it without distraction. The ship's captain introduced herself as Mara Ilian. "You've seen what it can do," she said as we stood on the command deck watching the stars stretch ahead of us. "I have. Good. Because we are about to find out what it is hiding." The fleet entered faster than light transit using a system that pushed the boundaries of physics to the edge of collapse. Human engineers had modified existing drive technology in ways that coalition science had deemed too unstable to attempt. It worked. Barely. The transition was violent. Space folded and twisted around us as if resisting the intrusion. For a moment I felt as though the universe itself was rejecting our presence. Then it stabilized. And we were gone. The journey took less time than expected. The swarm's trail was not difficult to follow. It left behind distortions in space, subtle but detectable if you knew what to look for. The humans had refined their senses to track these anomalies with frightening precision. As we approached the edge of known space, the distortions grew stronger. Then we found it. Or rather, we found where it had gone. The region ahead was wrong. That is the only word I can use to describe it. Stars were dimmer, as if their light was being drained before it could fully exist. Space itself seemed thinner, stretched in ways that defied understanding. Instruments struggled to provide consistent readings. Data fluctuated wildly as though reality could not decide what it was supposed to be. The crew of Resolute Dawn did not react with fear. They reacted with fascination. "We are entering its territory," Captain Mara said. "Territory," I repeated. She nodded. "It is not just a swarm. It has a source." The implication settled heavily in my mind. This was not a roaming predator. This was something with a center. Something with a home. The fleet advanced cautiously, deploying probes and drones to gather data. Each one transmitted information for a few seconds before being lost. Not destroyed. Lost. As if they had simply ceased to exist. "We are losing signal integrity," one of the technicians reported. "The deeper we go, the less stable everything becomes." Captain Mara considered this for a moment. "Adjust field harmonics. Increase redundancy. Keep pushing." The ship complied. We moved deeper. That is when the first attack came. It did not come from ahead or behind. It came from everywhere. Fragments of the swarm emerged from the distorted space around us, smaller than what we had encountered before but far more aggressive. They struck the outer edges of the fleet, probing, testing, searching for weaknesses. The human response was immediate. Weapons fired in coordinated bursts targeting specific patterns within the swarm fragments. Shields adapted in real time, shifting frequencies to counter incoming energy. It was not enough. The fragments changed faster than expected. They began to synchronize their attacks, focusing on individual ships, overwhelming the defenses through sheer precision. "We are being studied," a crew member said. Captain Mara did not deny it. "Then we study it back." New commands were issued. The fleet altered its formation, breaking into smaller units that moved independently. Each unit engaged the swarm fragments differently, creating a chaotic battlefield filled with unpredictable interactions. The swarm struggled to keep up. For the first time since entering its territory, it lost coherence. The humans exploited the opening. Targeted strikes hit the fragments at critical points, disrupting their structure and causing them to collapse into inert matter. The attack ended as suddenly as it had begun. Silence returned. But it was not a comforting silence. It was a waiting silence. "It knows we are here," I said. Captain Mara nodded. "Good. That means we are close." We continued deeper into the distortion. The environment grew more hostile with each passing moment. Systems required constant recalibration to remain functional. Even time itself seemed to fluctuate slightly, causing minor discrepancies in synchronization across the fleet. Then we saw it. At the center of the distorted region was a structure. Calling it a structure feels inadequate, but it is the closest approximation I can provide. It was vast beyond comprehension, stretching across a region of space larger than any construct ever recorded. Its form was fluid, constantly shifting yet maintaining an underlying coherence that suggested intentional design. This was not the swarm. This was what created it. The source. Every sensor focused on it. Data flooded in, overwhelming our systems with information that defied analysis. Energy readings spiked beyond theoretical limits. Patterns emerged within the structure, suggesting a form of processing or consciousness far more complex than anything the Coalition had ever encountered. It was alive, and it was aware of us. The entire structure moved, not physically in the traditional sense, but in a way that caused the surrounding space to ripple outward like a disturbed surface of water. The fleet reacted instantly, preparing for an attack. It did not come. Instead, something else happened. A signal was detected, not a transmission in any known format, but something deeper. A direct intrusion into our systems that bypassed conventional defenses. It was communication. The crew froze as the signal spread through the ship. Images formed in my mind. Not seen with my eyes, but experienced directly. Worlds being consumed. Civilizations erased. Endless cycles of hunger and growth. And beneath it all, a single driving force. Survival. It was not malicious. It was not cruel. It was simply doing what it had always done. The signal shifted. Now it showed something new. Humanity. Our battles. Our resistance. Our weapon. The null field. There was confusion, curiosity, and something else. Recognition. Captain Mara broke the connection. "Cut it off," she ordered. The systems purged the signal with extreme measures, isolating affected components and resetting core processes. The room was silent except for the sound of strained breathing. "It was talking to us," I said. "It was trying to understand," as she replied. Her expression hardened. "And now it knows we came to its home." The structure began to change. Segments of it separated, forming massive extensions that reached outward into space. Energy built within them, gathering at points that aligned directly with the human fleet. It was preparing to attack. "All ships prepare for engagement," Captain Mara commanded. "This is it." The fleet moved as one. Weapons charged. Shields reinforced. Every system pushed to maximum capacity. The structure fired. Beams of energy unlike anything we had encountered before cut through space with precision that made evasion nearly impossible. Several ships were destroyed instantly, the defenses unable to withstand the intensity. The humans adapted. They always did. Ships began to move unpredictably, altering their trajectories in ways that made targeting more difficult. Countermeasures were deployed, creating interference patterns that disrupted the structure's aim. But the structure adapted as well. Faster than before. It was learning from us in real time. Losses mounted. The fleet was being pushed back. Captain Mara made a decision. Prepare the device. I felt a surge of dread. You cannot use that here, I said. The distortion is already unstable. If you activate a null field at this scale, it could collapse the entire region. She looked at me. That is the point. The realization hit me like a physical force. You are going to destroy it. We are going to remove it from existence, she corrected. And everything around it. She did not look away. Including us if necessary. The crew did not hesitate. They began preparing the device. A larger, more stable version of the last resort weapon. Or at least as stable as such a thing could be. The structure intensified its attack, sensing the growing threat. Energy beams struck the fleet with increasing accuracy. Ships were lost faster now. But the remaining ships held their positions. They knew what was coming. They were willing to be part of it. The device activated. Space began to tear open once again, forming the edges of a null field that expanded outward at an accelerating rate. The structure reacted violently. For the first time, it did not simply adapt. It resisted. Massive portions of it broke away, attempting to escape the expanding void. Energy surged through its form in chaotic patterns as it struggled to comprehend what was happening. The null field grew, consuming everything in its path. The structure, the swarm fragments, the distorted space itself. Reality unraveled. The crew of Resolute Dawn watched as their target began to disappear, not destroyed but erased. Then something unexpected happened. The expansion slowed. The null field stabilized at a boundary that should not have been possible. The structure was not entirely gone. A portion of it remained. And it was changing. The signal returned, stronger than before. This time it was not chaotic. It was focused, direct. It reached into our systems, into our minds. Into me. I saw something new. Not hunger, not survival. Choice. The structure was adapting in a way it never had before. It was not just reacting. It was deciding. The images shifted again. Humanity. Our persistence. Our refusal to stop. Our willingness to destroy ourselves to achieve our goal. The signal carried a single concept. Enough. The structure began to withdraw. Not retreating in fear, but disengaging. It was choosing not to continue the conflict. The null field remained active but no longer expanded. Captain Mara hesitated. Then she gave the order. Shut it down. The device powered down gradually, allowing reality to reassert itself around the remaining structure. Silence fell once more. The structure remained motionless for a moment. Then it moved. Slowly, deliberately. It retreated deeper into the distortion, leaving behind a region of space that began to stabilize in its absence. The battle was over, but not in the way anyone had expected. We had not destroyed it. We had changed it. The fleet regrouped, assessing damage and losses. We had lost many ships. But we were still alive. Captain Mara turned to me. Do you understand now? She asked. I thought about what I had seen. The swarm, the structure, the signal, the choice. Yes, I said slowly. You did not just make it afraid. You made it think. She nodded. That is how you win against something like that. You do not just fight it. You force it to evolve. I returned to the observation deck as the fleet began its journey back toward Earth. The stars looked different now. Not because they had changed, but because I had come to witness the end of humanity. Instead, I had witnessed something far more significant. The moment a force older than civilizations learned something new. Not through conquest, not through domination, but through confrontation with a species that refused to be predictable, that refused to be consumed, that refused to be anything other than what it was. I began recording my report. I watched them battle again. I watched them go where no one else dared. I watched them face something that could not be defeated. And I watched them change it. That is why even alien monsters fear humanity. Because when humanity fights, it does not just destroy. It transforms the battlefield. It transforms the enemy. And sometimes, it transforms the universe itself. When we returned to Earth, the world was not the same one we had left behind. It was stronger. Not in the way the coalition measured strength with fleets and weapons and controlled systems. It was something deeper, something woven into every action, every decision, every moment of silence between words. Humanity had crossed a line that could not be undone. They had not just survived the swarm. They had followed it into the dark. And they had come back. The fleet's arrival was broadcast across the planet. Not as a celebration but as confirmation. The threat was not gone, but it was no longer unknowable. It had been seen. It had been challenged. It had been forced to choose. And that changed everything. I remained aboard Resolute Dawn as it settled into orbit above a planet that still carried the scars of the first battle. Reconstruction efforts stretched across continents. New structures rose where cities had fallen. Orbital platforms were rebuilt with designs that incorporated lessons learned in ways that would have taken other species generations to implement. Humanity did not wait for stability before moving forward. They built while the ground was still shaking. Captain Mara stood beside me as we watched the activity below. "They're already planning the next phase," she said. I did not ask what she meant. I already knew. The coalition had sent additional envoys. Ships from dozens of species now occupied the outer edges of the system, observing, studying, trying to understand what humanity had become. Some came with offers of alliance. Others came with quiet concern. All of them came with questions. I attended the first joint session between human leadership and coalition representatives. The chamber was larger than the one I had seen before, but the atmosphere was the same. Focused, direct, unwilling to waste time on ceremony. A coalition delegate from a species known for its rigid adherence to protocol spoke first. "What you have done has altered the balance of power in this region of space." The human response was immediate. "Good." The simplicity of the answer caused a ripple of unease among the delegates. "You do not understand the implications," the delegate continued. "The entity you engaged is not merely a predator. It is part of a larger pattern. There are others like it. If they learn from what has happened here, they will adapt." One of the human leaders finished. "Yes, we are counting on it." Silence followed. I watched the expressions of the coalition representatives shift from confusion to something closer to apprehension. "You intend to provoke further evolution," the delegate said slowly. "We intend to end the cycle," the human leader replied. The conversation that followed was unlike anything I had witnessed in my years of observation. It was not a negotiation in the traditional sense. It was a clash of philosophies. The coalition argued for caution, containment, and preservation of existing order. Humanity argued for confrontation, disruption, and transformation. Neither side was entirely wrong. But only one side had faced the swarm and come back with something more than survival. In the end, a fragile agreement was reached. The coalition would provide support, resources, and access to their accumulated knowledge. Humanity would share its findings and coordinate future actions within a broader strategic framework. It was not trust, but it was a beginning. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. The region of space where we had encountered the structure stabilized gradually. The distortions faded, leaving behind a void that was empty in a way that felt deliberate. The swarm did not return. But it did not disappear either. Sensors detected movement at the far edges of known space. Not the chaotic spread of a feeding entity, but something more controlled. More focused. It was changing. Humanity continued to prepare. New fleets were constructed with designs that integrated coalition technology with human innovation. The results were unlike anything either side could have achieved alone. Ships that could adapt their structure mid-battle. Weapons that could alter their fundamental properties in response to enemy defenses. Systems that learned not just from data but from intent. The last resort device was not abandoned. It was refined, stabilized, and made portable. I watched as humanity built tools that could reshape reality, and did so with a level of acceptance that would have terrified any other species. They understood the risks. They simply chose to face them. My role evolved as well. I was no longer just an observer. I became a liaison, a translator, not of language but of perspective. I helped the coalition understand why humanity acted the way it did, and I helped humanity interpret the caution of the coalition. It was not an easy task, but it was necessary. The next signal came unexpectedly. It was not detected by sensors. It was felt. A ripple through communication networks, a subtle shift in background noise that only became noticeable when it was already everywhere. The structure had reached out again. This time it did not invade systems or overwhelm minds. It waited. Humanity responded. A controlled connection was established under strict supervision. I was present when it happened, standing in a chamber surrounded by both human and coalition representatives. The signal formed slowly, carefully, as if testing the boundaries of what was possible. Images appeared again, but they were different. They were not memories of consumption or cycles of survival. They were observations of Earth, of the fleet, of the battle. It had been watching, learning, not just from conflict but from everything that followed. A human scientist stepped forward. "You have something to say." It was not a question. The signal shifted. For the first time it conveyed something that resembled structure. Meaning arranged in a way that suggested intention beyond instinct. It had learned communication. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. The message was simple. "You change." The human scientist nodded. "So do you." There was a pause. Then another message. "Why?" The question echoed through the chamber, carrying with it a weight that extended far beyond the words themselves. Why change? Why fight? Why refuse to follow the pattern that had defined existence for so long? The answer came from Captain Mara. "Because we can." She stepped closer to the projection. "Because staying the same means dying eventually. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday something comes along that breaks the pattern." She gestured toward the gathered representatives. "You were that something once. Now we are. And now you have a choice." The signal remained silent for a long moment. Then it responded. Choice. The word carried uncertainty, curiosity, and something else. Possibility. The connection ended. Not abruptly, not violently, but with a sense of completion. The chamber remained quiet after the signal faded. No one spoke. No one needed to. We all understood that something fundamental had shifted. The entity we had fought was no longer acting purely on instinct. It was beginning to consider alternatives. The implications were staggering. If it continued to evolve in this direction, it could become something entirely new. Not a predator, not a destroyer, but something that existed outside the cycle that had defined it. Or it could fail. It could revert. It could become more dangerous than before. There was no certainty, only potential. Humanity prepared for both outcomes. They always did. The months that followed were marked by an uneasy calm. Exploration missions were launched into regions previously considered too unstable to approach. Data was gathered, analyzed, and shared across an expanding network of allied systems. The coalition began to change as well. Not as quickly as humanity. Not as dramatically, but noticeably. Doctrines that had remained unchanged for centuries were reevaluated. New strategies were developed that incorporated adaptability and improvisation in ways that would have been dismissed before. Humanity was influencing them, just as they had influenced the entity. I found myself thinking often about the moment we had activated the null field. The point at which everything could have ended. We had been willing to erase an entire region of space to stop a threat. And yet we had chosen not to. That choice mattered. It was the difference between destruction and transformation. The next encounter did not come as an attack. It came as an invitation. A region of space beyond the stabilized zone began to emit a consistent signal. Not chaotic, not invasive, structured, deliberate. It was calling to us. Humanity did not hesitate. A new fleet was assembled. Larger than the first. More advanced, equipped with technologies that had been refined through months of relentless development. I was assigned to the mission once again. As we prepared to depart, Captain Mara joined me on the observation deck. "This is the part where it gets interesting," she said. "It has not been interesting already," I replied. She smiled slightly. "That was survival. This is something else. The fleet entered the region without resistance. The distortions were still present, but they were stable, controlled in a way that suggested intentional design. We followed the signal, and we found it. The structure was there, changed. Its form was more defined, less chaotic. Patterns within it were clearer, more consistent. It still radiated immense power, but it no longer felt overwhelming. It felt focused. The signal intensified as we approached. The connection formed again. This time it was easier, more stable. Communication flowed with greater clarity. The entity presented something new. Not images, not memories, concepts. It showed us the cycle as it had understood it. Growth, consumption, expansion, repeat. Then it showed us something else. Interruption, resistance, change. It had integrated what it had learned from us into its understanding of existence. And it was exploring what that meant. A human researcher stepped forward. "You are trying to break your own pattern." The entity responded. "Trying." There was uncertainty, but also determination. Captain Mara spoke again. "You do not have to do it alone." The offer hung in the air. Unprecedented, dangerous, necessary. The entity considered it. We could feel the process unfolding across its vast structure. Energy shifted, patterns reconfigured as it evaluated the possibility. Finally it responded. Together, the word carried weight, agreement, and something that felt very much like trust. The coalition representatives reacted immediately. Warnings, concerns, objections filled the communication channels. The idea of forming an alliance with something that had consumed entire civilizations was beyond anything they had ever considered acceptable. Humanity did not dismiss those concerns. But they did not let them dictate their actions either. A decision was made. Carefully, deliberately. A joint effort would be established. Limited in scope, heavily monitored, but real. The goal was not to control the entity. It was to guide its evolution. To ensure that the path it was beginning to explore led somewhere stable. Somewhere sustainable. It was a risk unlike any other. But it was also an opportunity. The work began. Communication improved steadily. Shared data allowed both sides to learn from each other at an accelerating rate. The entity adapted not just to survive but to cooperate. It began to restructure parts of itself, reducing its reliance on consumption as a primary function. New processes emerged that allowed it to sustain itself through energy exchange rather than destruction. It was not perfect. It was not complete. But it was progress. I documented everything, every breakthrough, every setback, every moment where the balance could have tipped in the wrong direction. There were incidents, moments where old patterns resurfaced, where the entity reacted instinctively rather than intentionally. Each time humanity responded not with overwhelming force but with controlled intervention, guiding the outcome back toward stability. They were teaching it, not as a master teaches a servant, but as one evolving system influences another. Over time something remarkable happened. The entity began to contribute. It shared knowledge of regions of space that had never been explored. It provided insights into phenomena that had previously been misunderstood or ignored. It became a partner, not fully, not completely, but enough. The galaxy began to change. News of the alliance spread slowly at first, then rapidly as its implications became clear. Species that had lived in fear of the swarm for generations now faced a new reality. The monster was no longer just a threat. It was something more. Reactions varied. Some embraced the possibility, others rejected it outright. Conflict was inevitable, but so was progress. I stood once more on the observation deck of Resolute Dawn, watching as the fleet moved alongside the entity through a region of space that had once been defined by fear. Now it was something else. Something new. Captain Mara joined me. "You finally understand," she said. I considered her words. "Yes, I think I do." I looked out at the shifting structure moving in harmony with the fleet. "This was never just about survival." She nodded. "It never is." I began my final report. I watched them battle. I watched them lose. I watched them learn. I watched them chase something no one else dared to follow. I watched them stand at the edge of annihilation and choose something different. And in the end I discovered the truth that the galaxy had been too afraid to see. Humanity is not feared because of its weapons. Not because of its resilience. Not even because of its willingness to do what others will not. Humanity is feared because it changes the rules. It refuses to accept that the way things have always been is the way they must remain. It looks at something ancient and unstoppable and asks a simple question. What if it could be different? And then it makes it so. That is why even alien monsters fear humanity. Because when humanity faces the unknown, it does not just fight it. It redefines it, and in doing so it reshapes the future for everything that exists within it.